Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Korean spicy chicken rice noodle bake. That's right, this isn't just my favorite new spicy chicken recipe. It's also my new favorite way to cook rice noodles. Or should I say not cook rice noodles? Since that was the key here, which might sound a little confusing, but all will be revealed. And all you need to understand for now is that this was incredibly delicious and very easy. And to get started, what we'll do is add some minced ginger and some finely minced or crushed garlic to a mixing bowl, over which I'm going to pour some rice vinegar. And when we start these marinades, I like the acid from the vinegar to touch the ginger, since it deactivates an enzyme that can make your meat mushy. So we'll pour that in and let it sit for a few seconds while we go grab some soy sauce, and we'll pour some of that in. And then we'll also need to add a little bit of salt, as well as some brown sugar, but not too much, because the next ingredient is a little bit sweet, and that would be some good old-fashioned American ketchup, or as the Italian server in Rome described it to me, American sauce. And then once that's been transferred in, we'll also want to add some sesame oil, followed by the star of the show, 2 or 3 tablespoons of Korean chili paste, also known as gochujang. And by the way, this brand was kind of medium spicy. Okay, some are mild, and some are insanely hot. So you may want to give it a taste first, before you decide how much to put in. I mean, you are, after all, the Chef John, of how much gochujang. And of course, you can always add more and adjust later. But anyway, once our marinade ingredients are in there, we'll take a whisk and give this a mix. And once we have that thoroughly combined, we will stop, and we will transfer in our pieces of chicken, which for me are going to be some boneless, skinless chicken thighs, which are by far the best choice for this. Okay, we can use breast, but those are so much easier to accidentally dry out and overcook. And please note as we're adding these in, we're giving them a good toss back and forth to make sure that marinade's getting into every nook and cranny. Since as you know, boneless chicken thighs are famous for their nooks and crannies. And that's it. Once our chicken's been summarily slathered, I like to put a piece of plastic over the top and transfer this into the fridge so we can let it marinate anywhere between 1 and 8 hours. Okay, we can leave this overnight, but a short marinade seems to work out just as well. And if you're keeping score at home, I only did mine for 1 hour. But no matter how long we go, once we're ready, we will prep our baking dish by pouring in a little bit of sesame oil, and we will brush that all over the bottom before we transfer in 8 ounces of dry, uncooked rice vermicelli noodles, which are also sometimes sold as angel hair. And make sure you're using the rice noodles for this and not a wheat-based noodle, since with this technique they're going to have a completely different texture. And what we'll do is kind of pull those apart and break off pieces if need be, so we can pretty much cover the bottom as evenly as we can. Okay, it is tempting to just lay those in and not do the breaking and separating, since as you work with this, little pieces of dry rice noodle are going to be flying all over. But I do think it's worth the extra effort and that little bit of a mess to create a nice, even, uniform base for our chicken. But before we chicken, we're going to mushroom. And I'm going to be using these maitake mushrooms, which, speaking of chicken, are coincidentally called hen of the woods. Okay, apparently whoever discovered these thought they looked like a hen sitting on a nest, which makes you wonder if maybe they were on another kind of mushroom. But anyway, we'll break those up and scatter them over. And yes, of course, just some regular sliced mushrooms will work. And then after the mushrooms, we'll do the exact same thing with some sliced Fresno chilies, or of course the sweet or hot peppers of your choice. And then after the chilies, we'll do the same thing with some freshly sliced green onions. And besides the marinade for our chicken, it's the moisture in these mushrooms and onions and peppers that are going to hydrate these dry noodles when they bake. And besides giving us a perfect texture, they are going to be way, way more flavorful than rice noodles that have just absorbed water, which is what happens if you boil them first. And that's it. Once whatever else we're using has been scattered over, we'll go ahead and transfer over our chicken, which I like to do with the smooth side up. And you'll also notice as I'm placing these on, any thinner and or ragged edges have been folded underneath. And that's so these thighs cook nice and evenly, not to mention probably look better. But having said that, you could place those on any which way you want, and this is still going to come out amazingly well. And then once our chicken's been placed down as shown, we'll go ahead and spoon over any of that extra marinade from the bowl, and we'll apply that as evenly as we can over the top of each piece. And a spoon's going to do a pretty good job of getting most of that marinade out of the bowl. But it's not going to get all of it, and we really, really want all of it. So what we'll do, since we were going to add it anyway, we will pour some chicken broth into the bowl. And then we'll grab a whisk or spoon, and we'll give that a stir so that we're getting everything off the sides. And then once that's been accomplished, we will pour that into the bottom of our dish, being very careful to avoid the chicken pieces so that we don't rinse off that marinade that's sitting on top of the thighs. And I did a really good job of that until the last second when I lost my concentration. And you can see what happens, which is really not a big deal. Just don't do that to all of them. But anyway, we will finish up with one more generous sprinkling of green onions over the top, at which point this is ready to transfer into the center of a 425-degree oven for about 30 to 35 minutes, or until our chicken is cooked through, and it looks like this. I know, that does look like one of the most delicious things you've ever seen. But let's go ahead and make it look even more beautiful by sprinkling on some toasted sesame seeds, followed by a few more freshly sliced green onions. And in a few moments, I'm going to show you how to finish this properly by dressing this with a little bit of rice vinegar and sesame oil and giving it a toss. But this looked and smelled so good, I had to go in for a little taste first. And as incredibly tasty and flavorful as that chicken is, our now perfectly cooked rice noodles are just as amazing. But I know what you're thinking. Those look kind of dry. I would want more sauce. Well, you actually don't. I'm going to explain all that in a few minutes. But for now, what we want to do once this comes out of the oven is remove the chicken to a plate, at which point we'll use some tongs with maybe the help of a fork, and we will toss our rice noodles with everything else left in the dish. And once we do, I like to dress this very simply with a generous splash of rice vinegar, and or if we wanted, we could do some citrus juice. Okay, some lemon and lime would definitely work in this. And then besides the vinegar, we'll also want to do a generous drizzle of sesame oil, at which point we'll give everything one final thorough tossing. Oh, and if you were just thinking, I would have doubled the marinade ingredients and doubled the amount of chicken broth so that we'd have something much saucier. Well, you could do that, but the noodles would not come out as good. All right, I did a bunch of tests, and the less moisture you use, the better the noodles come out. And even though maybe it doesn't look like it, the noodles are not dry at all, and they are extremely, extremely flavorful. And that's it. Once we're happy with our noodles, we'll go ahead and plate some up, and we'll top that with a piece of chicken, with maybe a few more sesame seeds and green onions. And that, my friends, despite not being all saucy, is so intensely delicious and flavorful and satisfying that any thoughts you had before you serve this, that it might need more of this or more of that, will totally fade away, and you'll realize this is exactly how you're supposed to eat it. But let's just say you're not convinced, and you insist on having more of that chili sauce. Well, then what you want to do is make another batch of the marinade, plus maybe like a half a cup of water, and then simply bring that up to a simmer, and then you could use that to spoon over as a sauce. But again, and I hope you trust me at this point, you do not need it. Okay, I really truly did think this was perfect, and it's been my experience that once you cook something and you think it's perfect, don't try to improve it, just enjoy it. And yes, I think this technique would work perfectly with pork instead of chicken, or some Korean-style beef short ribs instead of chicken, or, and I actually might try this soon, a completely vegetarian version, with maybe some different types of mushrooms. Oh yeah, so many possibilities, and so little time. But no matter how you tweak this recipe to your individual tastes, I think the method used here is very simple, and really does produce something quite extraordinary, which is why I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.